performative activism isn't the best, why it's still really good. Then I'm going to discuss CG's claim about, the right using performative activism as well. Then finally on identity. So on the alternative, they say that there is a trade-off in this debate because you can spend a lot of money on performative activism, for example, pride parades. Here's the reason that is not a trade-off on our side. First, in the vast majority of instances of performative activism, for example, posting something on Instagram that is a petition, you literally do not have a single cost with that policy. In fact, often you have things like donation drives where you actually get a plus from performative activism for other protests to use. But even in the instance of things like Pride, those are also massive, massive fundraisers for movements. You actually get much, much more capacity. And also when you have more social awareness for those movements, as Naomi eventually points out, then you're much more likely to have, for example, votes for policies that support those movements, that sort of thing. So we can both get the general message that they talk about. We can get the general idea that we want a better future, that the current is absolutely terrible, but we can also have groups with strong activists inform the political discussion surrounding those issues. So now, is this actually effective forms of activism? They say it's not because they often they're forward focusing rather than current issue focused. So you don't get solutions to problems and politicians are able to capitalize off the political will to do nothing. There are several issues with this claim. First, Instagram posts often literally do have solutions to problems. Pride parades aren't literally just celebrations of pride. They're often massive discussions about how gay people can be better integrated in society, for example, through bathroom bills for trans people. The point here is that stronger activists are often the ones who are sharing the posts that eventually get shared in the first place. So they're the ones who write the manifestos on Instagram about different ways to defund the police, for example, that were used in literal towns in the United States as an attempt to defund in the first place. But secondly, often there's just a wide range of posts that do exist. So there are a bunch of different ways to solve social problems, and there are a bunch of different posts. And so obviously you can have discussion and you can share different ones and you can see which ones are the best. But finally, even if you didn't have specific solutions, you still have things like petitions, you still have donation drives that are shared. So it was the fact that real activists could get out of prison literally because bail funds in the United States bailed them out when they were kicked out and put into prison for, quote, rioting, even when they were obviously just peacefully protesting. The point here is we can have, even if we didn't have their what they say, which is solutions to problems, we can still have good stuff happening. But when people are confronted with information that they would not have otherwise seen, they are much more likely to care about the issues that are facing, for example, African-American groups. They say that conservative groups have backlash on their side of the house, but that is unlikely because they are often simply not faced with the sheer terror of the problems that are existing within society. So it's a left-wing but not activist person who finally realizes that police violence is a massive issue in the United States, or it's the slightly conservative individual who watches George Floyd get shared across social media and realizes just how many people care about that issue. You begin to reflect on your own opinions. You teach children in a different way using different language. You judge what you think based on what other individuals think within society. We are social creatures, and we often take cues from what other people are posting, are sharing, what our friends, our family are issuing. And so we can break out of that social media echo chamber and finally understand what the real issues are. We're much more likely to give, even if it's a $10 donation to the Bail Project, that is still something that massively helps a person who is literally locked in prison because of their beliefs. We can get those benefits on our side of the house, whereas we can also maintain access to more more realistic activists who do have problem-oriented or solution-oriented processes. So we get the best of both worlds on our side. I'll take a POI from CG before I move on.
Practically, what do you think it's easier for an individual to do having read a Facebook post? Commit violence against immigrants or dismantle the patriarchy?
That is obviously just not the dichotomy in this debate. That is just so absurd. You think that someone is going to go out and beat an immigrant because they see someone on Instagram, but they aren't going to give a small donation to a charity. I'm going to explain why your probable extension is just completely false in a second, but first I'd like to talk about politics. So OG says that, politicians are able to coast off of the success of movements. They're able to say post BLM and then do nothing about it. But here's the issue. This actually puts a massive positive incentive on politicians and public figures to not do wrong. It is often a requirement to latch onto these movements as a public figure, but for backlash from the population, you don't want to not fulfill certain conditions of that movement. So when you post a black square, you now become tethered to that issue. You commit yourself to caring about that issue. Sure, there aren't specific solutions that are argued for in many of these posts, but that doesn't mean people won't be up in arms when you do absolutely nothing to help the condition of African Americans in the United States. This looks like sheriffs who were knocked out in elections recently because BLM protesters realized that they were doing nothing despite posting that black square on their Instagram. When you are performative and when you fail to have action, the very performers who you were once in agreement with backlash against you and kick you out of office or cancel you on Instagram. What this meant was that we did get the political change that OG didn't want to talk about. On CG, what they're probably going to say is that, right-wing groups are able to rally performative activism as well. Firstly, on Wang, performative activism reaches out much, much better to a left-wing base because it's often quick and social media based. And it's just true that, sure, there are some some right-wing people who are young, but the vast majority are just really old and generally aren't on social media to the same degree, aren't accessing the same echo chamber that we are having on our side of the house. So in general, it appeals to the left wing. But structurally, it is much more likely that social media appeals to the left wing, and this performative activism does, because this period of social justice came at the rise of this social media. So basically, social justice and kind of a turn in the historical juncture of support for minority rights was coinciding with social media existing. And so performative activism on the left kind of grew with social media, where on the right, they're many, many years behind in that they aren't using social media to the same degree in their movements. So what that meant was that it's unlikely that CG is able to claim the same harm. Even if they were, though, we have, on just weighing, we have better impacts for the left-wing groups in the first place. So OG and CG are out of the round. Now, I think that it's also important just on an individual level to be able to express your own identity through performative activism. So sure, physical oppression is obviously incredibly important and deeply traumatic. We already solved for that, but so too is a deep feeling of lack of acceptance in society. It's a trans person who internalizes the looks that they get while walking into the bathroom of their choice. It's the African American walking into an all-white class in their university and feeling that they cannot fit into that community. You are less likely to reach out in a society, take opportunities, come and talk to your family members when you do not feel accepted in the very society that you feel you ought to be able to call home. We had that with performances on our side, with being able to see others in the public eye validate your own experiences, post that gay people are valid, post that African Americans shouldn't be shot. You understand that many, many people in society do support your interests. You're more likely to have arguments for affirmative action, for example. Individuals also, though, are able to express themselves when performative activism is normalized. When it's normal to be able to come out of the closet on Instagram or walk down the street in a pride parade, you're much more likely to feel intrinsically safe in the society that you ought to call home. I want to point out that this is a valuable argument, but it's probably less valuable than the rest of the round, because structurally, if you're better able to get policies through political discussion or awareness, then you're probably able to better validate your own identity in the first place. So it's a valuable argument, but not more valuable than all the other claims that we already illustrated. We're very proud to oppose.
I would like to thank the Deputy Leader of Opposition for that